The night was unusually calm, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural in a land usually filled with the crackle of campfires and the distant lull of drums. A pale moon hung heavy above the rolling plains, its light casting silver upon the tall grass that swayed in whispers. The village of the Wind River tribe lay nestled in a shallow valley, where wooden lodges formed a circle around a communal fire pit. It was here, on the edge of this world of kinship and tradition, that a stranger appeared. He came not on foot, as most guests did, but on horseback, a proud jet-black steed that pawed the earth impatiently beneath him. The rider's cloak, dark with dust and frayed from long travel, flowed behind him like a shadow. His figure was broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a weathered hat, but even without seeing his eyes, the air around him carried a weight. He was not a man seeking refuge. He was a man carrying his own authority, as though wherever his boots touched became his domain. The villagers were not accustomed to outsiders arriving at night. Their laws of hospitality, however, were older than memory itself. No wanderer was to be turned away at the gates, for who knew when one of their own might one day require the same mercy? And so, when the guards saw him approach, they exchanged wary glances, but opened the way. The younger of the two murmured under his breath, "He doesn't carry himself like a lost traveler. He carries himself like something else." The older guard hushed him but did not disagree. The stranger dismounted with a heavy thud, boots sinking into the soft earth. His movements were confident, calculated, as if he had already memorized every corner of the village he was about to enter. He gave no introduction, no words of gratitude, but led his horse forward and allowed the guards to escort him toward the central fire. The silence of his arrival made his presence all the more unsettling. Around the flames, a group of villagers had gathered, men carving arrows, women weaving, children playing in the dirt. Conversations faltered as soon as he entered the circle. All eyes followed the broad figure, the way he moved with a strange authority, as though he belonged nowhere but expected to belong everywhere. It was not uncommon for merchants, hunters, or messengers to pass through the Wind River tribe, yet this man carried no wares, no pelts, no bundles of trade goods. He brought only himself, and that was enough to stir unease. An elder, tall and graying, stepped forward with a staff carved in the shape of an eagle's head. His name was Kiona, known for his wisdom as much as his vigilance. He studied the man for a long moment before speaking. "Stranger," his voice carried the weight of custom, "our fire is open to travelers. You are welcome to share our food and rest your horse. Tell us your name and what brings you to Wind River." The man's lips curled in something that was not quite a smile, yet not far from mockery. His voice was deep, steady, and carried an accent that marked him as a wanderer from far beyond these lands. "My name is of no concern," he said simply. "I am only passing through. A bed, a fire, and a meal will be enough." His tone bore no humility, no trace of the gratitude expected of a guest. Instead, it was a demand veiled as a request. The villagers stirred uneasily, but the elder gestured for silence. Hospitality, even to the proud, was sacred. "Then you shall have these things," Kiona replied. "Come, sit, rest your bones." The stranger moved toward the fire, lowering himself onto a log, his dark eyes flicking over the faces around him. The children shrank back under his gaze, and even the men felt a prickle along their spines. It was then that she entered the circle, Liana, the daughter of the tribe's most respected warrior. She carried a clay bowl of stew, her movements graceful yet strong, her head held high. She did not yet know that his eyes would follow her, that her presence would awaken something dangerous in the stranger's heart. He took the bowl from her hands without a word, though his fingers lingered just a moment longer than they should have. Liana felt a chill and pulled back quickly, her instincts warning her of something her people had not yet seen. She lowered her gaze and stepped away. But the impression had already been made. The man's hunger was not for food, but for something far more destructive. As the fire crackled and the village resumed its rhythm, the stranger ate, his thoughts unreadable. To the villagers, he was a guest for the night. To himself, he was a conqueror waiting for opportunity. The Wind River tribe had welcomed him with open doors, but they did not yet know that with him came not peace, but the first tremor of a storm that would rattle the very heart of their people. And in the shadows of that calm night, the seeds of betrayal were quietly sown. The night deepened, and with it, the sense of unease that clung to the Wind River village like a mist. The communal fire had dimmed, its flames dancing lower, while most of the villagers retreated into their lodges. The stranger, however, remained awake. His posture was rigid, his eyes following the movement of those who still lingered. For all, his silence. He was a man who consumed everything with his gaze, meals, surroundings, and above all, people. Among the last to leave the fire was Liana, the young woman who had served him earlier. She walked with quiet dignity, her braid glimmering in the firelight as she carried empty bowls back to her family's lodge. She was admired throughout the tribe, not just for her beauty but for the strength of her spirit. Daughters like her were considered treasures, not only to their families but to the whole community. Every man in the tribe knew this, respected it, and honored her presence. But the stranger was not a man of the tribe. His laws were different, or perhaps he had none at all. When Liana passed by again, the stranger rose from his seat, his boots crunching against the earth. His shadow fell long across the fire's dying glow. She sensed him before she turned, her steps faltering ever so slightly. Something inside her whispered danger, that primal voice which warns of wolves in the dark. She forced herself to remain steady, to pretend she had not noticed him. "Girl," the stranger's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "Stay a moment." Her back stiffened. The word girl was an insult here, reducing her to something less than what she was. She turned slowly, her eyes steady, masking the tremor in her chest. "It is late," she replied with firm politeness. "I must return these and sleep. Tomorrow will bring work." But the stranger stepped closer, his heavy boots closing the distance between them. His shadow now touched hers. "A moment," he repeated, his tone heavier this time, carrying the weight of someone unaccustomed to being denied. Liana's hand tightened on the bowls she carried. She glanced toward the huts, where families had already retreated. The village was not far, yet the silence of the night seemed to press down, muffling the chance for her voice to carry. Still, she lifted her chin and said, "Please, don't touch me." The words were clear, firm, a plea that carried both fear and strength. She thought perhaps this would be enough, that even a stranger would understand the sacredness of her request. But his lips curved into a mocking smile as though her protest amused him. His hand reached forward, brushing against her arm with the weight of someone who had no right. The bowls rattled in her grip as her breath caught in her throat. "I said," she whispered, louder this time, "don't touch me." The stranger ignored her plea. His grip tightened, his touch no longer fleeting but claiming, an act of arrogance rather than affection. In his mind, her resistance was nothing but an obstacle, something to be dismissed rather than respected. To him, she was not the daughter of a tribe, not the pride of her people, not even a person with a voice that deserved to be heard. She was merely his for the taking. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, and she pulled back, twisting out of his grasp, with all the strength she had. The bowls clattered to the ground, breaking the silence of the night. Her heart pounded as she stumbled backward, breath coming quick, tears stinging her eyes, not of weakness, but of outrage. "You dishonor me!" she cried, her voice breaking through the stillness. The words rang louder than he expected. From nearby huts, shadows stirred. A mother lifted her head, a child blinked awake, and the first sparks of alarm began to kindle among the people. The stranger cursed under his breath, stepping back with a scowl, but the damage was done. What he thought would be hidden in silence had instead been witnessed by the night itself. Liana gathered herself, standing tall despite her trembling hands. "Leave me," she said, her voice steadier now, cutting through his arrogance. "You will regret this." Her words carried no empty threat, though he did not yet understand it. For in the Wind River tribe, an insult to one woman was an insult to every man, every elder, every warrior. It was not merely a personal wound. It was an assault on the heart of the people. And though the stranger turned away with a smirk, as though nothing more would come of it, the echoes of her cry spread quietly from ear to ear. By morning, what began as a plea in the shadows would grow into a fire too fierce to be contained, for the plea had been unheard by the man who wronged her, but it had been heard by the tribe. The bowls lay shattered upon the earth, their clay fragments scattered like broken promises. Liana stood trembling, her breath sharp and uneven, her chest rising as if it carried the weight of the entire world. The stranger had already turned away, muttering under his breath, his pride wounded not by guilt, but by the audacity of her resistance. He slunk back toward the lodge the villagers had granted him, vanishing into the shadows as though nothing had happened. But something had happened, something the whole village would soon feel. Liana bent down, gathering the broken shards of clay with shaking hands. She tried to will away her tears, but her body betrayed her, and warm drops streaked her cheeks. She was not a woman easily shaken. She had faced winters of hunger, storms that threatened to wash away their homes, even the grief of losing a brother, to sickness. But this cut deeper. It was not merely an insult to her, but a violation of the sacred trust of hospitality, an invasion of the dignity she carried as both daughter and protector of her people. She carried the shards back to her family's lodge, each step heavy. When she entered, her mother looked up from the fire pit inside, instantly reading the storm in her daughter's face. She rose, hands hovering as though to steady her. "Liana," her mother whispered. "What is it? What happened?" Liana's lips trembled. For a moment, she wanted to stay silent, to swallow the humiliation, to bury it where it could not hurt anyone else. But the truth clawed its way out. "The stranger, he laid his hands upon me." Her voice cracked on the last words, raw with shame. "I told him not to. I begged him. He did not listen." Her mother's face blanched, her hands flying to her mouth. A sharp, piercing cry tore from her throat, a sound so full of grief that it seemed to split the very air. The wail echoed into the night, rolling across the huts like thunder. Within moments, others stirred, neighbors lifting their heads, men rising from their bedding, children clinging to their mothers in alarm. Liana fell to her knees beside the fire, her mother clutching her tightly, rocking her as if she were once again a child. Yet this embrace could not erase the wound. Outside, whispers spread like wildfire, carried from ear to ear. Something has happened. To Liana? Yes. The stranger. The shame that settled upon her was not hers to carry alone, though in her heart it burned as though she bore the burden single-handedly. In her mind, she replayed the moment again and again, the dismissive grin on his face, the heavy grip on her arm, the way her plea had been nothing but air to him. And each time she remembered, the pain sharpened. Her father, Tayan, a warrior known for his steadfastness, entered the lodge at the sound of his wife's wail. His broad frame filled the doorway, And when his eyes landed on his daughter, trembling, in her mother's arms, he knew something unthinkable had occurred. His fists clenched, his jaw set like stone. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice low, controlled only by the thinnest thread of restraint. Liana raised her eyes, shimmering with tears. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I told him not to touch me. I begged him. He would not hear me." For a moment, silence choked the air, heavy and suffocating. Then Tayan let out a growl deep in his chest, the sound of a man holding back the storm raging inside. "He has dishonored not only you," he said, his voice trembling with fury, "but all of us. This night will not be forgotten." Outside, the tribe gathered. Men and women alike lit small torches, their faces somber, their voices hushed. Though no blood had yet been spilled, the village felt as though it had already been struck. They had welcomed the stranger with open doors, given him food, shelter, and safety, and in return, he had defiled their trust. But what cut deepest was not just his crime. It was his arrogance, the certainty with which he believed he could act without consequence. That arrogance was a dagger pointed at the heart of the tribe itself. Through the silent hours of that night, the village did not sleep. Mothers sat by their daughters, whispering promises of safety. Fathers stared into the darkness, their hands restless, yearning for weapons they had not yet taken up. Elders gathered quietly, their words low but laced with fire, knowing decisions would soon be demanded of them. And in her lodge, Liana sat upright, staring into the embers of the dying fire. Shame gnawed at her, yes, but beneath it something stronger began to take root, a fierce resolve. She was not just a victim to be pitied, she was the voice of every daughter who had ever pleaded, "Don't touch me." Her cry would not be forgotten. The stranger might have ignored her plea, but the night had heard it, and by dawn, the whole tribe would rise with it. The night after Liana's plea was heavy with silence, but silence in the Wind River tribe was never empty. It was the silence of storm clouds gathering, of hearts thundering inside chests, of voices preparing to break free. And it was her mother's voice that broke it first. Her name was Nayeli, a woman known for her strength and tenderness alike. She was not merely Liana's mother, she was a voice in the council of women, a healer, a woman others leaned on in times of despair. Yet when her daughter's trembling words fell from her lips, "He touched me. I told him no." He would not listen. Nayeli became something else entirely. At first she covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if the world itself had cracked in two. Then the disbelief gave way to grief. She clutched her daughter, tightly, rocking her as though she were small again, tears flowing freely. But grief quickly turned to fire, and the fire took form in her voice. It began as a sob, low and breaking, but within moments it grew, swelling into a cry so piercing that even the animals outside stirred. A mother's wail. It was unlike any other sound. It was grief, fury, shame, and love tangled together, a cry that reached the ears of gods and men alike. It carried into the night, echoing through the lodges, pulling every soul from their slumber. Men rushed from their huts, grabbing torches, their faces pale with alarm. Women pressed hands to their chests, their own voices rising in murmurs of sorrow and disbelief. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, frightened not only by the sound itself, but by the truth they knew must have caused it. Nayeli did not stop. She cried out her daughter's name. She cried against the insult that had been brought upon their home. She cried with the fury of a mother whose child had been touched by dishonor. The sound seemed endless, carrying over the valley, a sound that would not be forgotten for generations. Inside their lodge, Tayan, Liana's father, stood stiff as stone. He had been silent, his fury locked tight within his chest. But Nayeli's wail shook even him. He gripped his spear, the wood groaning, under the strength of his hands. His eyes were dark, his jaw clenched, but he did not stop her. He knew this was not just her grief. It was the grief of every woman who ever lived in fear of being silenced, the grief of every mother who prayed her daughter would be safe. Nayeli's voice was not only for Liana, it was for them all. Soon, the village was gathered outside. The circle around the fire pit filled with figures, their faces lit by torchlight, their eyes wide with anger and sorrow. Whispers surged like wind through the crowd. "The stranger!" He dared touch her? She begged him, and he ignored her? Does he think our daughters are without protectors? Every murmur added to the storm. Every glance fueled the fire. They had welcomed him, fed him, given him shelter. He had repaid them not with gratitude, but with shame. To touch one woman against her will was to touch the dignity of the entire tribe. This truth ran deep in their blood, older than any law. Nayeli finally emerged from the lodge, her hair disheveled, her cheeks wet with tears, but her back unbent. She stood before the tribe, her voice raw and trembling, yet unyielding. "You have heard my cry," she said, her voice carrying over the crackle of torches. "It was not for me alone. It was for all of us. My daughter begged him to stop. She pleaded. And he ignored her." She spat the last words as though they burned her tongue. "Is this what we allow in our village? Is this what we accept under our fire?" The crowd growled in unison, voices rising, fists clenching. Mothers clutched their daughters, fathers glared into the darkness where the stranger slept, and warriors pressed hands to their weapons. One of the elders, gray-bearded and solemn, raised his staff. Her voice is the voice of the people. If we do not answer this, then tomorrow it will be another daughter and another, until we are no longer a people of honor, but a people of shame. A deep rumble of agreement followed, and Nayeli's tears glistened in the firelight. She looked at her daughter, sitting silently by the doorway, her face pale but her chin lifted. Liana's silence spoke as loudly as her mother's cry. She would not be broken, but she could not fight alone. Nayeli lifted her arms to the night sky and cried once more, not a wail this time, but a call. Let every ear hear. Let every heart burn with us. Tonight my daughter's dignity has been trampled, but by dawn we shall see who stands with her. The people roared in response. The echo of it rolled across the valley, frightening the horses, stirring the wolves in the distance. And though the stranger lay in his lodge with arrogance still in his chest, the tide had already begun to turn against him. For a mother's wail had awakened more than sorrow. It had awakened vengeance. The fire in the center of the village had burned low, but the air was thick with heat, not from the flames, but from the fury that churned in every chest. Nayeli's wail still seemed to linger in the night air, echoing in memory even after her voice had grown hoarse. Fathers had clenched their fists, mothers had pulled their daughters close, and the warriors of the Wind River tribe had exchanged glances heavy with unspoken promise. Yet the tribe was not one of blind rage. Honor guided them as much as fury. And so, while whispers and cries filled the circle, the elders called for order. The people stepped back, creating space around the fire. Torches were planted in the ground, their flames flickering against the faces of those who gathered. It was time for the Council of Elders. The elders were 5 in number, chosen not only for their age, but for their wisdom and balance of judgment. They were men and women alike, keepers of memory, guardians of tradition. Tonight, they bore the heaviest burden, to decide what must be done when the laws of hospitality had been shattered, and when the dignity of the tribe itself hung in the Yuye. balance. At their center stood Kiona, the tall, gray-haired leader who had first welcomed the stranger. He leaned heavily on his eagle-headed staff, his face carved with sorrow. His voice carried across the assembly, calm but edged with iron. Brothers, sisters, children of the Wind River, tonight a grave dishonor has been brought upon us. A guest has entered under our fire, eaten our food, and in return has scorned our sacred laws. He paused, letting his words sink deep. He ignored the plea of our daughter Liana. He has shown no respect to her voice, nor to the spirit of our people. This crime is not hers to carry. It is ours to answer. A murmur rose from the crowd. Agreement, anger, pain. The people leaned in closer, eager for what would come next. Elder Matuya, a woman with braids streaked in silver, spoke next. Her eyes burned like embers. We are not beasts who strike without thought, but neither are we weaklings who swallow shame. The law of our people is older than all of us. When one is dishonored, all are dishonored. If we do not act, then we teach our enemies that our daughters can be touched without consequence. A growl of approval rolled through the assembly. Several men struck their spears to the ground in rhythm, a rising drumbeat of anger. Another, Elder, Tayan's uncle Ahuli, raised his hand. His voice was softer, yet no less firm. We must choose carefully. To kill a guest without trial breaks its own law. Hospitality, even when betrayed, cannot be abandoned without thought. But his voice darkened. When a guest becomes a wolf, is he still a guest? Or is he a danger we must drive away? The question hung heavy. Even those who leaned toward caution could not deny the truth. This man was no longer a guest. He was a poison, a threat. Tayan, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. His presence alone quieted the assembly. His voice was steady, though his rage was carved deep into it. He touched my daughter. He ignored her cry. He spat. On our fire, he thinks there will be no answer. His gaze swept over the crowd. But I say to you, if we allow this to pass, we betray not only Liana, but every woman of this tribe. If we allow this wolf to sleep beneath our roofs, then our people are already dead. The crowd roared, fists raised, voices crying out as, "No, no, no, no!" Kiona struck his staff to the ground 3 times, silencing the uproar. His voice was like thunder, filling the night. Then let it be decided. At dawn, the man will be brought before this circle. He will answer for what he has done, not only to Liana, but to us all. Matuya lifted her hands. And he will not face only words. He will face the sight of every warrior, every protector of this land. Let him see with his own eyes that one plea ignored has awakened 300. The number rolled across the assembly like a tide. Men and women alike cried out, lifting their weapons, pledging themselves to the cause. 300 warriors would rise with the sun, standing not as individuals but as one body, one spirit, one voice of justice. Liana, seated beside her mother, lifted her gaze toward the fire. Her eyes glistened with tears, but there was something else within them now, strength. She heard their voices, felt their support, and knew she was no longer alone in her shame. Her pain had become a banner, her plea a battle cry. The council had spoken. The decision was made. At dawn, judgment would come, and as the torches burned lower and the people dispersed to sharpen blades and prepare themselves, the stranger slept. Unaware in his lodge, dreaming arrogantly of his power, never knowing that the entire might of Wind River would rise against him when the sun touched the horizon. The decision of the council had been made. At dawn, the stranger would stand before the circle of fire and answer for his violation. Yet the night was far from over, for while the elders had spoken, It was the warriors of the Wind River tribe who would ensure that judgment carried the weight it demanded. The news traveled from hut to hut like a river breaking its banks. Warriors were summoned from their sleep, some young and eager, others scarred by battles long past. Fathers kissed their children, mothers wrapped their arms around their husbands, brothers clapped one another on the shoulders. The air thrummed with a single truth. By morning, they would stand as one body, one shield. Tayan, still burning with rage, was the first to kneel before the fire. He pressed the blade of his knife against his palm and drew a shallow cut, crimson drops falling into the earth. His voice was strong, carrying across the silent crowd. For my daughter, for my people, and for the honor of every woman who calls this land home, I swear this oath. I will not let her plea be forgotten. I will not let her shame be borne alone. Until my blood is spilled or justice is done, I am her shield. The crowd erupted with a low rumble, a storm of approval. One by one, the warriors came forward. Some pressed knives to their palms. Others laid hands upon their spears or dipped their fingers into the ashes of the fire pit, marking their brows with soot. Each spoke their vow. I will stand with her. My spear belongs to her voice. Her cry is our cry, and I will not rest until it is silenced by justice. Younger warriors, some hardly more than boys, stepped forward with trembling hands, their voices cracking but firm. If I must fall tomorrow, let it be for her. Let it be for us. The older men placed hands on their shoulders, not to stop them, but to steady them, acknowledging the courage it took to stand. The women, too, added their strength. Though not all would bear arms, they placed baskets of arrows and stones by the fire, gifts for the men who would fight. Some raised their voices in song, low and haunting, a rhythm that pulsed through the earth and quickened the blood of every warrior. It was not only men who would defend Liana, it was the whole tribe, bound together by oath. Kiona, the elder who had welcomed the stranger, stood tall among them. He lifted his staff, its eagle head gleaming in the firelight, and declared, "Let the heavens bear witness. 300 stand ready, each a shield for our daughter. If one plea is ignored, then 300 voices will answer. From this night forward, the Wind River is unbroken." The cry that followed shook the valley. Spears struck the ground in rhythm, shields thudded against chests, voices rose in unison. The fire roared higher, as if fed by the fury of their oath. The sound carried into the forests, startling owls from their perches, sending wolves howling in the distance. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath their vow. Liana stood in the shadows beside her mother, tears streaming silently down her face. But these were not tears of shame. They were tears of awe. She had expected judgment, yes, but not this. Not the sight of hundreds kneeling, rising, swearing themselves to her side. She felt her burden lifting, shared now among them all. Her voice, ignored by one man, had become the heartbeat of 300. Naeli placed her hand upon her daughter's shoulder, whispering, "You see, child, you are not alone. No one will ever silence you again." The night stretched on, but no one slept. Warriors sharpened their spears until they gleamed like silver teeth. Bowstrings were tested, arrows fitted with fresh heads, shields were painted. In the colors of the tribe, reds for blood, blacks for strength, whites for spirit. The sound of preparation filled the village, steady and unrelenting. Some warriors prayed to the ancestors, whispering names of those who had fallen before them. Others sang low chants, their voices weaving together like a rising storm. The women walked among them, laying hands upon their brows, offering blessings, braiding their hair with feathers for courage. And through it all, the fire burned, its flames dancing higher than ever, as though it too had sworn an oath. When the first pale glow of dawn touched the horizon, the warriors gathered in formation. 300 strong, They stood in silence, their faces grim, their eyes fixed. Each one carried the weight of the oath made that night. Each one had become not just a fighter, but a guardian of Liana's honor. The stranger still slept, unaware. But soon, when he stepped out into the morning light, he would not see one girl he had dismissed. He would see an army. The oath had been spoken. The oath would be kept. Dawn was still far from breaking, but the village was already alive with the sound of steel and resolve. The warriors of Wind River had sworn their oath, and the fire of their promise burned hotter than any flame. Yet the elders knew. 300. Warriors alone were formidable, but the insult laid upon Liana was not only the tribe's wound. It was a wound that touched every allied clan bound to them by blood, by marriage, by shared wars fought side by side. So, as the night stretched onward, messengers were sent into the darkness. Young riders mounted swift horses, their hooves pounding the earth like drums of war. Each carried words not written on parchment, but spoken with breath and memory. Words that would carry the weight of the insult to every ear that mattered. Wind River has been dishonored. A daughter's plea was ignored. Her cry is now our cry. Will you answer? Through forests, over rivers, and across rolling plains they rode, torches strapped to their saddles, guiding their path through the blackness. The cold wind stung their faces, but they did not falter, for they knew every moment counted. By dawn, the stranger would face judgment, and by dawn, the people must show their strength in numbers. Back in the village, the preparations swelled. The warriors who had sworn their oaths now stood in formation, testing their discipline. Rows of men moved in unison, shields raised, spears lifted high. Arrows were lined in neat bundles, and fires roared in pits where blacksmiths hammered last-minute repairs to blades. Liana watched it all with wide, unblinking eyes. She had never seen her people like this, united, fierce, unrelenting. For her. The thought both humbled her and filled her with a fire of her own. She did not want to be remembered only as the woman who had been wronged, but as the one whose cry had awakened warriors across the land. Nayeli, standing at her side, whispered softly, "Do you feel it? The storm is rising. It is not grief anymore. It is power." And indeed, it was. By the time the first messengers returned, the horizon was faintly glowing with the first hint of dawn. Their horses were lathered with sweat, their faces flushed, but their voices rang out triumphantly. "They are coming!" one shouted. "The Stone Creek clan marches, 50 warriors already on their way." Another dismounted, gasping for breath but grinning. "The Red Hawk riders will be here by midday. Their chief sends word. An insult to one is an insult to all." The crowd erupted with cheers, fists raised, voices blending into a roar. The warriors pounded their shields in rhythm, the sound echoing across the valley like thunder, and the news did not stop there. One after another, messengers returned with pledges of support. Clans that had once quarreled with Wind River put aside old grievances. Distant allies, bound by blood ties generations old, declared their loyalty. Even nomadic bands who rarely fought for anything but their own survival promised to stand with them. By mid-morning, the narrow valley was no longer just Wind River. Tents were pitched, horses tethered, fires lit. Warriors from across the land poured in, their weapons gleaming, their faces stern. They came in small groups and great bands, until the ground itself seemed to shake beneath their presence. The stranger, still lodged in the hut given to him, had no idea of what gathered outside. He may have thought the night's uproar would fade by morning, that his arrogance would once again cloak him like armor. But if he had stepped outside, he would have seen what no arrogance could withstand. Not 300, but the rising strength of entire tribes, drawn together by one woman's plea. As the sun climbed higher, the number swelled beyond what any elder had dared imagine. Rows upon rows of warriors filled the valley, their banners snapping in the wind, their chants rolling like distant thunder. Spears caught the light, arrows bristled in quivers, shields painted with sacred symbols reflected the fire. It was not just an army now. It was a storm, one that no man could outrun. Kiona, the elder, stood before them, his staff raised high. His voice carried across the vast assembly. "Children of the land, hear me. This is no longer the shame of one village or one family. This is a shame carried upon every daughter of every clan." A plea was ignored. A cry was silenced. But together, we answer it. Today, 300 has become more. Today, the earth itself rises. The roar that followed shook the valley. Men stamped their feet, the ground trembling with their might. Women raised their arms, voices joining in song. Even the youngest children shouted, their small cries mixing with the thunder of the groan. And Liana, standing among them, felt the storm's power surge through her. She was no longer simply the girl who had whispered, "Please, don't touch me." She had become the heart of an uprising, the reason for a gathering that would be told in stories for centuries. The storm had gathered, and by the time the stranger opened his eyes, the horizon was no longer his to command. It belonged to those who had risen against him. The first rays of dawn stretched across the valley, casting a pale light over the Wind River village. Birds stirred, but even their songs seemed cautious, as though nature itself had sensed the tension that gripped the land. The stranger, who had spent the night in arrogant slumber, awoke to a world entirely changed. He stepped outside his lodge, expecting the usual calm of the morning, the quiet rustle of the village, the smoke of the cooking fires, perhaps the curious gaze of a few early risers. But what met his eyes stole the breath from his chest. The valley was alive, not with casual movement, but with the precision and discipline of hundreds, no, thousands of warriors, their weapons raised, their banners snapping in the wind. Spears gleamed like rows of silver teeth, shields bristled with the markings of every allied clan, and arrows were notched with deadly readiness. The cries of warriors rose in unison, low and threatening, echoing from the surrounding hills. He staggered back, disbelief etched across his face. The threat of a single village, 300 strong, had become a tidal wave of loyalty, a storm of vengeance, and he had slept through its gathering. His mind raced. He had underestimated their unity, their honor, and above all, the power of one woman's voice. At the center of the formation stood Liana, her chin lifted, her eyes steady and unyielding. She had emerged from the lodge at first, light, cloaked in the simple garb of her tribe, yet her presence commanded more attention than any armor or weapon. Around her, her mother Nayeli and the elders stood, their faces solemn, their hands clasped around staffs and weapons. Tayan, Liana's father, stepped forward, gripping his spear with a strength that seemed to radiate outward. He looked at the stranger with a mixture of wrath and cold resolve. "You have disrespected not just my daughter," he said, his voice carrying like a drumbeat across the assembled warriors, "but every one of us. Today your arrogance ends." The stranger tried to speak, but his words faltered. No excuse could bridge the chasm of dishonor he had created. Every ally he had hoped would overlook his actions had gathered, and their eyes burned with the knowledge that he was now surrounded not by a single village, but by a united force bound by justice. Kiona raised his staff, signaling the start of judgment. His eagle-headed staff pointed directly at the stranger. "You will answer not with words, but with witness. Witness the strength of a people you thought weak. Witness the resolve of a girl you dared touch. Witness the consequences of ignoring a plea." Liana stepped closer to her father, her eyes locked on the stranger's, unflinching. "I begged you to respect me," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of every whisper and shout from the night. I warned you, and still you touched me. Now you face the judgment of those who stand with me. There is no hiding. There is no escape. The crowd stirred, weapons raised, shields tightened. The air was electric with anticipation. Every man, woman, and child felt the gravity of this moment. This was not merely punishment, it was the affirmation of their honor, the enforcement of the sacred law that one's plea must never be ignored. The stranger tried to retreat, but Tyon stepped before him, spear planted firmly in the ground, blocking the way. Behind him, the rows of warriors shifted forward, forming a wall of steel and resolve. He realized, too late, that the valley itself had become a trap. Every escape route cut off by those who owed allegiance to Lyanna and her family. Nayeli's voice rose above the murmurs of the crowd, strong and clear. See this. This is the consequence of arrogance. This is what happens when one believes a woman's plea is meaningless. Today, her voice becomes our sword. The stranger looked around, desperation flickering in his eyes. There was no mercy here, no compromise. He had been lulled by confidence, lulled by hubris, and now he stood at the mercy of a people united by honor and fury. The valley remained silent for a heartbeat, a tense pause as the wind whispered across. The weapons, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then Kiona struck the ground with his staff once, twice, 3 times. The signal was clear. The reckoning had begun. The warriors did not attack, yet their presence alone was an unyielding force. Their collective strength, sworn by oath, unbroken by fear, bore down upon the stranger like a wave that could not be turned aside. The morning sun climbed higher, casting its pale golden light across the valley, illuminating a scene the stranger could hardly comprehend. The ground was alive with warriors, their weapons raised, their faces grim with determination. He had believed that arrogance and audacity could shield him, that his position as an outsider granted him immunity. But the oath of the Wind River tribe and their allies had transformed into a tidal wave of justice, unstoppable, relentless, and inevitable. From every corner of the valley, warriors moved in perfect cohesion. Spears bristled like a forest of steel, shields locked in a solid wall, arrows gleaming in the sunlight like countless stingers ready to strike. The allied clans had arrived as promised. Red Hawk riders, Stone Creek hunters, and nomadic bands with battle-tested skill, all bound by a single purpose. They did not speak. Their silence carried the weight of fury and honor. Tyon, Lyanna's father, led the central formation, his spear steady in hand. He looked to his daughter, who stood at the forefront, her eyes unwavering. "Do not falter," he said softly. "This is what they feared. Our unity, our honor, our refusal to be ignored." Lyanna's chin lifted higher. She had become more than a girl wronged. She was the symbol of their cause, the voice that had summoned warriors from every corner. Kiona, standing atop a small rise, raised his staff once more. The eagle at its head seemed to glint with divine approval. "Today, the Wind River answers," he proclaimed. "Today, no one will forget that to touch a daughter against her will is to touch the fury of a united people. Let the stranger see that a plea ignored becomes the rallying cry of justice." The valley echoed with a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. The warriors advanced in unison, not rushing blindly but with controlled, deliberate steps. Each movement was a drumbeat of determination, a promise that the insult committed would not go unanswered. The stranger realized the depth of his mistake. He had underestimated not just Lyanna, but the honor that ran through the veins of the Wind River tribe and their allies. The 300 warriors he had dismissed the night before were now magnified many times over. Their combined strength was overwhelming. His mind raced for an escape, for some trick, for any form of leverage. But there was none. The tide had risen, and it could not be turned. From the flanks, allied clans joined in tight formations, surrounding the stranger from all sides. Archers notched arrows, their fingers tense on the bowstrings, ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. Shield-bearers braced themselves, forming a wall so solid that even the wind seemed to bend around it. The very valley had become a fortress of collective justice. Nayeli, Lyanna's mother, stepped forward, her voice carrying like a bell of warning. "Look upon the strength you have provoked," she said. "Your arrogance has summoned not one army, but a tide. You cannot turn back, and there is no mercy in your path." Lyanna, standing beside her mother, raised her hand. Her voice was calm, precise, and cutting. "You touched me without consent. You ignored my plea, and now you face the consequence of your actions. Let the tribes bear witness. We will not stand silent. We will not allow fear or shame to dictate our honor." The stranger's face was pale, his confidence eroded by the sight of the combined force before him. He had assumed that might alone could grant him dominance, that one girl's plea could be dismissed without repercussion. But the tide of justice was not measured in fear. It was measured in unity, in oath, in the unbreakable bond of people who would not allow their dignity to be violated. From behind him, whispers of strategy and warning carried through the ranks of warriors. Leaders signaled with hand gestures, the army adjusting its formation to contain the stranger completely. Every avenue of escape was blocked, every flank secured. The net was closing, and the stranger understood that his only hope had evaporated with the rising sun. Kiona struck the staff to the ground one final time. The signal was unmistakable. The warriors advanced steadily, methodically, a tide that could not be resisted. Each step was a warning, each movement a reminder. Justice waits for no one. The stranger tried to flee toward the forest's edge, but Tayon's spear intercepted him, blocking his path with effortless authority. Behind him, the sea of warriors. Pressed forward, the sound of their approach a roar of inevitability. There was no negotiation, no bargaining, no plea that could reverse the consequences now fully set in motion. And as the stranger stood surrounded, the truth of his situation became clear. This was not vengeance born of blind rage. This was justice, organized and absolute, a testament to the strength of a people united by honor and oath. The plea he had ignored had become a rallying cry. The insult he had inflicted had summoned a tide he could not resist, could not survive against, and could not escape. The moment was electric, frozen in time. The valley alive with warriors, the sun illuminating the weapons, and the resolve etched on every face. The tide of justice had arrived, and it would not be denied. The first true light of dawn broke over the valley, spilling pale gold across the assembled warriors. The Wind River tribe and their allies stretched in disciplined lines, a sea of shields, spears, and unwavering resolve. Mist clung to the grass, swirling in the morning breeze, but it did nothing to dull the intensity of the moment. The stranger stood in the center of the clearing, small and pale against the overwhelming might of a united people realizing too late that no arrogance could protect him. Lyanna stepped forward, her figure framed by the rising sun. She carried no weapon, no shield. Her strength lay entirely in her presence, in the authority of a plea that had been ignored yet had sparked something far greater than vengeance. Around her, her mother Nayeli, her father Tayon, and the elders formed a protective semicircle, guardians of honor and witnesses to the justice about to unfold. The stranger's eyes darted from one line of warriors to the next, from the archers readying their bows to the Red Hawk riders and Stone Creek hunters, positioned at strategic angles. His mind raced for escape, for some last-minute trick or plea. but the reality of the moment struck him fully. There was no escape, no negotiation, no illusion of power left to exploit. He had underestimated them, underestimated the weight of a single woman's plea, and underestimated the strength of unity. Kiona, the elder whose eagle-headed staff had first signaled the assembly, stepped forward. His voice, calm yet commanding, carried across the valley. This is the moment when justice speaks. The plea of a daughter was ignored. The law of honor was violated. Today the consequences are witnessed by every eye in this valley and every clan allied to Wind River. Lyanna's voice rose next, steady and unwavering. I begged him. I pleaded for respect. He chose to ignore me. But this is not only about me. It is about every woman whose voice has been dismissed, every daughter whose plea has been ignored. Today we answer together. A hush fell across the warriors. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath as the moment crystallized into inevitability. Then slowly, as if on cue, the sea of warriors advanced. Not recklessly, but with precise, controlled steps. A demonstration of collective power, a wall of justice that bore down upon the stranger without haste, yet without mercy. The stranger stumbled backward, panic overtaking him. He had counted on fear, on the complacency of the village, on isolation, but he had misjudged everything. The people who surrounded him were no longer merely his victims. They were a living testament to the strength of unity and the unwavering defense of honor. From the flanks, allied clans joined in, forming an unbreakable circle. Archers raised, their bows, arrows aimed high but ready to strike at the slightest hint of aggression. Shield-bearers braced, their walls a solid fortress of iron and will. There was no chaos, only order, disciplined yet implacable, as if the land itself had risen to enforce justice. Tyon stepped forward, spear at the ready, his eyes locked on the stranger. You will touch no one again, he said, his voice firm and controlled. You will leave this place, or face the consequences of violating the honor of this land. The stranger opened his mouth, tried to argue, but no words could carry weight against the power arrayed before him. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only fear. He realized fully that he was at the mercy of the collective will of the people he had wronged. Lyanna's gaze held him, unwavering. Look around, you, she said, her voice carrying across the valley. This is the consequence of ignoring a plea. You believed one voice could be silenced. Today, you face the power of every voice that has joined in this cause. The warriors stepped closer, a tide of resolve closing in. Yet no one struck. Their presence, their readiness, and the sheer magnitude of their unity was itself a judgment. The stranger fell to his knees, understanding finally that this was not vengeance, it was justice. He lowered his eyes, shamed and defeated, and in that moment, the valley seemed to exhale. The tension eased, the wind shifted, and the sun's light fully embraced the scene. Lyanna's plea had transformed into a declaration of power. She had not only defended herself, but had awakened the strength of every warrior, every mother, every father, every ally who believed in honor and respect.